When I see what's going on in many of our spaces, especially in America, and listen to how these oppressors, racist, white supremacists, homophobic, transphobic, horrible people speak about religion and God, it makes my stomach sick. And it allows me to understand that church, as we know religion, is one of the most terrible place.
Happy Easter, everyone. I was definitely not going to make a video today, except I went for a walk and I came across this video from Dr. ABC that was released a few weeks ago. And instead of making a video of clips and explaining things, I think it would just be easier if we just watched it together. There are very interesting moments in this video, but why do I care about Dr. ABC? He's very influential. He is, I believe he's director of the Black Studies or Black Excellence Studies, something like that, at OISE of the University of Toronto. He gives a whole bunch of PD to educators in the province. He's author of several books. He's just a really, really influential guy. And so what he says holds a lot of weight. And I think we should just go straight into watching this particular video. So here we are. This is the Spring 2025 Speaker Series, My Journey to Self-Decolonization, Emancipatory Pedagogy, and Freedom Dreaming in Education. Let's just jump straight into it.
Thank you so much for the sharing of the land acknowledgement. And I'm going to go right into an ancestral acknowledgement as, of course, invited into the space to share with community. I also walk in my own identity as a Black man and sharing about my journey today. That's why we are here. And so I want to acknowledge the indigenous Africans who were forcibly removed from their native lands and dispersed across the New World. This involuntary migration heavily contributed to the movement of African-descended people across the African diaspora to places like Canada. As students and learners, we deem it highly necessary to think deeper and examine the processes that led to the disposition of indigenous peoples on this land and settler colonialism, stolen people on stolen land. In entering a conversation about anti-Black racism, decolonization, especially we're going to talk about today, it is important to center the humanity of Black children and Black families and to examine systems such as education system that act upon them. And this comes from the past president of the Ontario Black History Society, now Professor Natasha Henry, who is also a professor at York University. I want to start by saying Akwaba, and it's a very common word in Ghana, which means welcome in the Akan language, and many Ghanaians, basically all educated Ghanaians speak we speak English, right? And but you see this word Akwaba when you go to Ghana in the airport, and so I just want to use that. One of the first words that I learned in Ghana in Twi is Akwaba, which is to be welcome. I want to say again, welcome to join me here. You know, we're doing a recording, so we also have not a room where everybody's in the same space, but I see you all. I see a lot of community members. Please feel free as we're speaking. Some of you have been in space with me before to know that I will jump into the Q&A box and the chat box and see what you're saying and respond to it. So please, please, please feel free to do so. Don't hold back your comments, your questions.
Just to jump in here, I'm just going to play this. I might comment every now and again, but mostly I want to play it because I want you to hear the entire talk that he's giving. I think I can add my own commentary, but I think most of it he can do very well on his own. So let's watch.
Questions, your wonderings, do not hold that back. This is a space that you have been invited in, and as I say, welcome Akwaba, and I want you to do that. This work is very personal to me, very passionate, very intentional. As I talk about my journey to self-decolonization, emancipatory pedagogy, and freedom dreaming. And as I'm speaking today, I want to center a few things. I want to center is that this work is new and it's ongoing. I am a part of this work. I am central to this work. I am the work. As we said, it's my journey to self-decolonization. And so it's happening as we are speaking. It's happening as I'm traveling. It's happening on my journey. It's happening as I presented. I just came back from just this Sunday from the National Council for Black Studies. I was in Cincinnati, Ohio, a space with over 400 academic scholars, professors, faculty, community members talking about Blackness, a rich melanated space. And so you can imagine what that conversation was like as I shared my work and learned so much. As a matter of fact, when I talk about journey, I discovered that there are about three universities, I should say, in America that goes to Ghana between May and June to do pedagogy work, to do self-work, to do learning, not going to Ghana to learn in the space. And so that was a discovery that I made, and I have made those community connections. So I wanted to kind of highlight that for us to understand even the power of research. As we are doing research, the power of research and connections. And so it is a self-decolonization journey. So it's for me, and it's a direct line to community. I want to be very clear. I want to be very clear when I say that. It's my journey, and it's a connection through pedagogy and community in freedom dreaming. So yes, it says self-decolonization. But what do we do with that? And I want to center that question for all of us at this point. What do you do with that? When you say you are self-decolonizing, what is that useful for? What is that for? And I think important, there's a big criticism and there's a constant critique of university and faculty and research, and how is it used? Even in decolonizing ourselves, we have to think about how are we decolonizing our pedagogy, how are we decolonizing our practice, how are we decolonizing our research. I want to center that, especially to all the grad students and the community members who are in the space. How are you doing that? And so as we do this work, as I do this journey, there are words coming up for me. Decolonizing journey. It's an empowering journey as well, because as you decolonize, you empower. As you strip away colonial practices and colonial trappings and trimmings, then you have to walk into your authentic self. You have to know if you decolonize and trim away so much that we are used to, what is it replaced with? And I want us to think about that. In all this work of decolonization, what are we replacing it with? Because if we are not careful, we are replacing the decolonization with new forms of colonization. And so the intentionality of emancipatory pedagogy, of liberatory pedagogy, of how I show up as a professor in academic spaces, in who I am becoming, in my language, my words, every single thing has to be intentional as we lead to freedom dreaming. So I wanted to center that a little bit. And so it's a journey, like I said, and this journey started long ago.
I just want to add that in all the talk of decolonization or any of the anti-racism or LGBTQ curriculum, all this stuff, there's a lot of talk of dismantling and disrupting, but you don't often hear about what's meant to replace the system after it's been disrupted and dismantled. And I'm not sure that he really talks about that in this talk, but he does say that he will in the beginning.
Started informal, and many of you, as you are doing your own research, you are going to realize when people ask you, tell me about your research. Many of us, if you begin your research in the day you started university, then there are issues with that, because we have to understand that the work that many of us are doing, we have found meaning within our research, within the university. We have found definition and terminologies, and we have found spaces. But that's not how many of our research began. And I want to kind of model that for you to let you know that this academic research started years ago. And it started with songs, actually. Growing up in Jamaica, listening to Bob Marley, and one of the favorite songs from his album Uprising, it says, emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. And that's a powerful song that I've been using and I've been talking about for years. What does it mean to emancipate myself? Because we already emancipate. You speak to many Jamaicans, Black people, they don't even want this conversation because they feel that they are so emancipated, not realizing how much of the trappings of colonization we are so embedded in us today.
So what he's saying, my interpretation here is that if you are a person of color and you feel emancipated, you feel liberated, you feel like things are working fine, then you have not realized that you are in fact colonized, and you need to do more work to see yourself as the victim that you are in this colonial society. That's what I understand from this. So when they talk about solidarity with community of color and all this, I think they mean those that agree with this ideology, because if you're Black and you don't agree with this ideology, you have work to do because you haven't joined us yet.
I made a post the other day and I said I made it the first of the year. I made it on January the 1st, and I said, I hope that many of us as Black people, Black folks, we will learn how to stop feeding, and I actually use the term breastfeeding colonial practices, because so much of what we have around us, we are responsible for maintaining. I want you to understand what I'm saying, that so much of colonial practices and trappings and trimmings and the way we do things, we are responsible for maintaining those things. And I'm going to get to that later on in a very intentional way for us to understand when Bob Marley says, emancipate ourselves, that we have to learn how to resist things that are constant colonial practices.
Yeah, so if you're not engaging in anti-racist ideology, which frankly is quite racist and collectivist, so if you're not engaging in that as a person of color, then you are the problem. That's what he's saying.
And so the next part that I draw, and it's in the work that I'm writing, that I'm going to be, sharing my work in book chapters and presentations like this. Another person is Lauryn Hill. And the way she talks about I Get Out, this is one of the songs that impacted me. I remember the second time hearing this song, I cried. When she said, I get out of all your boxes. I get out. You can hold me in these chains. I'll get out. And she said, Father, free me from this bondage. And a powerful part of the song that I have been unpacking very lately is knowing my condition is the reason I must change. Do we know who we are? Do we know the conditions we are in? Do we know how much, even me as a professor at the university, am I aware of the structures within a university like this that will hold me in boxes? I would need maybe 2 hours to explain some of those to you, but I think a lot of you know because you took your time There's 43 of us on a lunchtime today. That's notable that you took your time on a lunch break to be here. So I'm going to make an assumption that most of us in this space, we know our condition. We know our blackness. We know our indigeneity. We know our, for me, I know that my immigration status is significant. It's a part of the box. My blackness is a part of the box. The ways in which I have engaged in religion is a part of the box. The ways in which we police ourselves is a part of the box. The way in which we restrict and constrain ourselves so we can be a part of these institutions is a part of the box. The ways in which people around us remind us to be careful of how we try to get out the box is a part of the box.
So my interpretation is there's standards and boundaries so that everyone can get along, and they don't, or he doesn't like that for whatever reason, a multiplicity of reasons to do with identity. He doesn't feel like he should adhere to these particular standards, and he sees it as his role to, I guess, keywords disrupt, dismantle those standards and use this ideology as a reason to do so. That's what I'm hearing.
So I want us to understand the reality around us. Who are you? Another person that inspired this work is also Dr. Martin Luther King. But there's a statement that hit me hard the first time I heard it. It was a speech, Black Independence, back in 2009 conversation. And it's a video. And when he talked about someone told a lie one day. And I know for a fact that I grew up in Jamaica with so many lies that I've got to believe. I was reminding people that as much as many of us are rubbishing Christopher Columbus today, many of us are rubbishing the idea and the thought of Christopher Columbus today. I have to remind us that we have to remember that as little boys and girls growing up in Jamaica, you were taught who Christopher Columbus was. And those days, he was a great person. The narrative was he was amazing. He discovered Jamaica. All the way from Spain as an amazing explorer. Coming to the region on the Pinta, the Nina, and the Santa Maria. And all of us wanted to be like Christopher Columbus. So because those were the things we were told, we gave a lot of credit and space and adulation to Christopher Columbus' arrival in 1494. What happened before that? Now we are learning. So I want us to be careful, and even in our work and our research and our pedagogy and our practice and our positionality, ask yourself, who are you centering? Which voices? I know you've heard this many times, but take a step back to really think about how were you taught? And if you are a faculty member here, how are you teaching? And whose voice is being centered? Many of us, we do a land acknowledgement. I saw this very funny thing online this morning. How do we do that? I hope you realize that the land acknowledgement has become a recital for many of us, and we just say it. And we only say it because if we don't say it, somebody's going to say something. Many of us, we don't care.
How are we feeling about using land acknowledgements for, I guess, anti-Black racism stuff? Because it seems like that's what he's doing. Now, I have feelings about the land acknowledgements to begin with. I think they compelled the speech, and I'm not sure that they achieve much. He's right. People just end up reciting them, right? It becomes like a virtue signal. But I was curious. This is the first time I came across an anti-Black racism land acknowledgement for, in this case, about Jamaica. So how are we feeling about that?
About that. How are we centering? Which voices are we centering? And so I grew up in a space where Christopher Columbus was centered. We are now decentering him and rubbishing his work. But he was centered. What happened before 1494? The indigenous people, the genocide. We are very offended by using those words in many spaces. But there was a genocide when Christopher Columbus, the Spaniards came. The Arawaks were wiped out. Our indigenous people of Jamaica was wiped out. So we have to understand what these things look like, and of when slavery began, and how when we get independence. The other day, it just dawned on me that I was born less than 15 years after independence, 1974. Honestly, I'll be very honest with you. While I'm writing this work, it just dawned on me. What does that mean for someone like me? How much of that I'm still carrying? And of course, the trapping. But I want to go back before I go to another thing, and maybe one of the most important work that inspired my work. And it's also from Bettina Love. And I want you to read this with me very carefully. And this sums up the power of my journey to decolonization. This actually is the best quote that I can use to describe my journey right now. And that comes to us from Bettina Love. She said, this book is mattering. Powerful word, mattering. Surviving, resisting, thriving, healing, imagining, freedom, love, and joy. All elements of abolitionist work and teaching. It's not just the surviving and the resisting. You're going to see through my work, a lot of us, we have to understand the journey is not just about surviving and resisting. The journey, I felt that, thank you, ancestors, is also about healing and thriving and freedom and love. And you're going to see that intentionally through my journey. You can take a picture, by the way, of any of my slides. You have permission to take a picture of any and all of my slides and share if you wish.
So what I'm hearing is to have abolitionist work, abolitionist teaching is what's required to get this emancipation, this liberation. So again, it's the disrupt, dismantle. They have to dismantle what exists to get what they want. And he was talking about rubbishing Christopher Columbus, that he was held in high regard in the past, and now we're rubbishing his work, and this was a good thing. So it sounds like you need to rubbish what exists. You need to dismantle what exists to be able to get what you want, to replace it with something else, which is curious because I'm not seeing why we can't have a lot of things go on at the same time. I don't know why we have to tear something down to pull something up, but that's my interpretation of this abolitionist work, this liberatory education, is you have to tear down what exists so that you can replace it with what you want, but this incredibly individualistic sort of way where you have all these competing identities vying for their own joy, I suppose it is. But let's carry on.
So this really sums up my journey. I try to find other work, but this says it more than anything else. The imagination, the creativity, the refusal, the remembering, the vision thinking, the healing, the rebellious spirit, the boldness, the determination, the subversiveness. This is the journey that I have invited you to today. And so I want to take you way back to the books that I grew up on. I want to take you way back to a little black boy growing up in Kingston, Jamaica. I want to take you way back to understand that my stars and my influence, none of them looked like me. I love Cinderella. I know every single fairy tale. The Hardy Boys, I have read maybe 53 of the 54. I think it's 54 in the collection. Nancy Drew, I think it's maybe 56. I think I've read maybe all. I want you to understand on a Sunday afternoon on a movie. We watch Anne of Green Gables. We watch Little House on the Prairie. These were our stars. I want you to understand when we say freedom, dreaming, and emancipatory pedagogy, I want you to understand if this is all our children, our students get to know, how will they ever see themselves in any way?
But what he's saying is you have to rubbish the current thing to get your thing centered. So these have to be rubbished to center other things. So we're not actually looking at what the better stories are. It's just you have to rubbish the current thing to have your ideological thing take its place. I have concerns about that. I don't have problems with having books about Black children or Black stories. There's no issue with that. My issue is, why do you have to rubbish other things to make your thing the most important?
When whatever is beautiful, whatever is powerful, whatever is amazing, whatever is of value does not look like any of us. I want you to understand, if you're a school teacher in this space, I want you to understand what that looks like. And so I remember this picture quite well, even in a book like this, in The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. The Blackness was also a big man like Jim was placed in a space where it's always submissive, subservient to anything whiteness. And so a change happened, and this is a part of the work. This is a part of the work. When a librarian, one teacher, a librarian pulled me aside, and she noticed I was just reading everything the Nancy Drew and all the boys. I was just reading them in twice a week at the library. And she pulled me aside. She said to me, I want to show you other books. Books where the cover, look at the books, where our stories were being told. Books as Bettina Love shared, where there was stories about Blackness mattering, surviving, resisting, thriving, healing, imagining, freedom, love, joy. Books where Black people went to space. Books where we were bold and visionary. Books that told our stories of religion. One of my favorite books, I spoke to a young lady who presented in Cincinnati last week. I went to the presentation. This is a power of research. And she was talking about African retention and religion. And I said to her, you need to read this book, The Wine of Astonishment by Earl Lovelace, talking about the Shouter Baptist movement in Trinidad, where we understand that our ancestors who were dragged there, they came with stuff that kept them. And even today, those things are still being rubbished and being pushed aside. In Jamaica, where I'm from, you talk about Obi and Voodoo and Kumina and Poko and revival, and immediately it's met with disdain, mistrust. It's met with ideas of it being demonic and evil. And so we have to understand why we need to do the decolonization. So quickly, my first trip to Ghana was in 2022. And that's where it started. I use these pictures. You can see the door of no return down there. You can see what they call in Ghana safe castles, like safe dungeon. I remember the first time I ate food, drank bissap. I turned to someone, I said, this is sorrel. I said, this is sorrel. I couldn't believe it. One of my favorite drinks in my entire life is Jamaican sorrel. Go to Ghana, got a drink, and when I tasted it, I said, this is sorrel. For me to explain to you what happened that day, it was magical. And then I started learning the history. remembering that our ancestors brought so much and kept so much and maintained so much to our food and identity. And I'm going to move right along because there's going to be many occasions for you, I'm guaranteed, to hear more of my story. But when I left Ghana, August of 2022, I sat down. There's a whole story I could share it to you here. I sat down. This is on the shores of the Atlantic Ocean, the same ocean that our ancestors were dragged from. And we sat down and we were literally going out there to do a photo shoot, really living our best life. And if you notice on your left there, you see Sankofa and Ashe. That is actually on the banks of the Atlantic, the shores. We were writing on the shore. And immediately we were there writing, one person screamed out. I will never forget that. One of the young ladies, she let out a scream. Another one started crying. And that maybe for me, I've always believed in the presence of our ancestors, but that for me was something that I will never forget. Never forget. We went out to laugh and play and frolic as we deserved to do at the shores of the Atlantic Ocean, only to break out in screams and cries. The presence of our ancestors. We were reminded of who we are. I sat down there and I can tell you my life changed significantly because when I came back, I myself took on the responsibility of myself to say, I am my ancestors' wildest dream. And I can tell you that water brought me so much power. I can tell you my walk has been different since August 2022. And there's a level of fearlessness that I walk in that I still question where I got it from, but I just attribute it to this day in August 2022. I am genuinely fearless in the ways I operate in many spaces. And I think a lot of people have figured that out, but that is attributed to the journey. When I came back, the first thing I wanted to do was to share. And I want you to notice the date. It was September 28th at a community class. I want you to realize how intentional I was. As I came back to Canada, the first thing I did in my course, I invited community to be in the course. So this was the flyer. This was a flyer that I shared. It was a community class. And
this guy has his own YouTube channel, and there are so many videos of him going on rants about himself, about how successful he is, how good looking he is, how he has the best bed. Whatever it is that is good or he perceives as good, that he has it. And so it's his job to do this anti-racism for everyone else who doesn't have it. Like it's just this malignant narcissism using the language of oppression. And he's kind of doing that in a way here. He's like, he's centering his own experience, his own story. I guess it's his own lived experience and turning that into something he has to teach others and berate others into adhering to this ideology. In the beginning, he was talking about how people of color who had not gone through his process of working through the oppression they're facing and so on and so forth. Well, they were supporting and enabling whiteness and so on and so forth. But it's always about him, his story, his success, how awesome he is. I would welcome you to go watch almost any other video on his YouTube channel. It's called Dr. ABC, I think.
Topic that day was going back, going forward, lessons from my journey to Ghana, identity, community, resilience, and Black joy. This is 2022. Before I start writing anything, I just wanted to share in community. And I want you to take a note that this class was in a course called Black Identity, Pedagogy, and Practice, offered here at the University of Toronto, CTL 5708.
Black Pedagogy and Practice, a course on that is telling you that there's, according to Dr. Andrew B. Campbell and other people like him, there's various ways of knowing, and one of the ways of knowing is being Black. So you have to teach for that way of knowing. And so you have to teach Black kids differently to other kids. So that implies that every race has to be taught differently. That's culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy. That's one element of that, is that somehow kids learn differently based on their race or so-called culture. That makes it very difficult, I imagine, for teachers to teach, because we live in a multicultural society. And so in your classroom, if you have 30 different cultures or ethnicities in that classroom, can you imagine teaching each individual child according to their race? What does that even mean?
And then came another powerful move. I was invited by Professor Clelia Rodriguez, who does Seeds for Change, to present my work. We had a beautiful conversation about my journey to Ghana, and I've been speaking to community nonstop. If you realize, as I came back, notice the dates, I have been speaking to community nonstop. Professor Gillette Allen from Humber University, who was on the trip with me. Dr. Damian Crawford, medical Black doctor who does equity work, was on the trip with me. Gladys Sakine, also Ghanaian, who was on the trip with me. And we had conversations in community. And that conversation led to other conversations.
I think he just said he was on the trip with another Black doctor. And okay, so I actually don't care that this doctor's Black, but I think what he's saying is they're engaging in this equity work, which is this anti-racist approach, which is this various ways of knowing, teaching Black pedagogy. So if the doctor's there and he's in line with all of this, I think he's saying that there are doctors out there who are practicing culturally relevant and responsive medicine, perhaps treating or assessing somebody's medical needs based on their race. And look, that can happen. I think sickle cell anemia affects Black people more than other races for various reasons. So, I mean, maybe there's some reason for that, but I'm just, knowing what I know about DEI and anti-racist ideology, that does concern me just a slight bit.
And Professor Clelia Rodriguez created an amazing space called Seed for Change. And she invited me in that space to speak. And if you notice the question she asked, a powerful question: who are you without colonialism? And so I spent time to work on that presentation, to have this conversation. I want to share something very significant, why there are two identical posters. I was slated to speak on November the 23rd, 2022. My mom passed away on November the 22nd, 2022. A day before my presentation, my mom passed away. And I want to bring you on a journey with me. After I made the presentation, that was the presentation.
So I'll just take this back just slightly. I want to comment on something. So in these photographs here, I want to draw your attention to the first photograph on the left. It says that he taught in 2022 this course on racial justice education and what it means, something to do with commitment, political intention, and bravery. But it's the political intention that I want to draw your attention to, because the meaning of most of the work that I've been putting out on education has to do with this political intention. It is a transformation of the education system towards a political goal. So when we talk about critical race theory in education, or the practice of it, the applied practice of it, which is the RRP, it is a political agenda. But it's not all politics. It's a very specific kind of politics. Well, first of all, should it be in education and pedagogy? I mean, that's the fundamental question. What's the purpose of education? Is it political? But then beyond that, if it is political, are we aware that it is coming from a political leaning? And it's not just a leftward leaning, it is a far leftward leaning, which edges into different socialist and Marxist theories. Right? So that's the political intention where most of this stuff is coming from. And it's not hard to figure that out when you look at many of the scholars that are noted through a lot of the videos that I put out from these activist pedagogues. They're very, either they themselves or the people they cite are almost always socialists or Marxists of some variety. And so that's the political intention that he's talking about. But that doesn't get said, or it doesn't often get mentioned specifically. They don't say, I'm pushing Marxist ideology into education. No, they call it other things. And in this case, they call it racial justice in education, because it is racial justice from the lens of the Marxist tradition in racial justice. It's not just any political intention. You need to be aware of that. So that's what I wanted to draw your attention to.
Before my presentation, my mom passed away. And I want to bring you on a journey with me. After I made the presentation, that was the presentation, Who Are You Without Colonization? I want you to note the question that was asked of me. And I want you to note the added response that I add to the question. Freedom dreaming and lessons from Ghana. Remember now, research is ongoing. I am forming. I am reforming. I am decolonizing. I am putting off and I am putting on. The next time I present the same work was in May. I still was focused on the question and I added the power of emancipatory pedagogy. I want you to take a note where it's coming from, the journey, as I encourage you all, as many of you as researchers and doctoral students and candidates, as your research, as you engage in the work, you are redefining the work.
How are we all feeling about educators going into the classroom and centering themselves and their experience in terms of how they teach and how they present information to children in elementary school, even in secondary school? How are we feeling about teachers making it about themselves? Just a question for you to think about.
And that is why when students come to me to ask about research, I said you have to engage in research to understand research. You can't be outside of research to do research. You have to step in research. And so as I'm doing this, I am putting off, I'm putting on, I am learning new things. And then I started to write. And I want you to know the writing started to form. And as I wrote, I wanted to be a part of the mastery work that Professor Kelly Rodriguez was doing with Professor Gabi. But my paper wasn't ready for this book at this time. And I'm sure it will be ready maybe for our next book or another invite. But I also want to share with you that the work that I was doing was going to be a part of this book. Who Are You Without Colonialism? Pedagogies of Liberation. And I want you to take a screenshot of that book and get that book, of course, if you can. It's co-edited by the same Professor Kelly Rodriguez and Josephine Gabi, amazing professors doing this work, especially in response to all the colonial trimmings and trappings that we are so accustomed to. Who are you without colonialism? And that's a question for every one of us to answer.
I find that really interesting because we're all products of what came before us. And yes, the country was colonized. Many countries across all of human history have been colonized. But I, for some reason, I just find this really worrying, this idea of decolonizing your mind. I understand about thinking outside the box and thinking more broadly about things, but it does feel very culty, this idea that I'm still getting my head around. I don't know what I'm trying to comment here, but I think I need to think about this a little bit more. But ultimately, we are all the products of all of the history that we've experienced, but all of humanity's experienced, and that does include colonialism across the world in many different formats. I'm not sure there's such a thing as decolonizing your mind. I think, well, he's going to talk about it a little bit later, but I think this is more to do with when he talks about decolonizing in the context of anti-racism. I think he's going to talk about it later, but it's getting rid of whiteness. That's kind of what he's alluding to.
And when I say every one of us, I mean every one of us. It's not an indigenous people question. It's not a Black people question. It's a everybody question. Because if you are benefiting from colonialism, you also have to ask, who are you without those? I want to be very clear on that, because I think some of us get carried away thinking this is a question for Black folks only or indigenous folks, but this is for all of us. I see your question, it is Shani. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That are many of us, many persons who are being educated in the West will speak English, but for many Ghanaians in the indigenous ways, they do not even speak English. They speak their native language of Tree. Like I tell you, I'm going to be learning Tree for sure. That's what I'm engaging on my trip. So thank you so much for that question, Shani. Absolutely. Thank you so much. But I noticed there's a comment, I think it's from Eunice, about the way we deal with pain and loss. And I want to share something with you because you're so right there. On my trip to 2023, I want to take a time for everyone to focus on the pictures. I really want you to focus on the pictures that I've selected on my journey in 2023. My mom had passed away in November. I want to go to Ghana so bad. I don't know why. Of all the places I want to go to kind of get some healing, I could have gone to anywhere. You know, people like to say, go to an all-inclusive hotel, go to Europe, go to Paris, go to this, go to New York. We use that easily. For me, I just want to go back to Ghana so bad. And I went. And I engage, I want you to listen to me carefully. I engage in softness.
Does he sound like he's engaging in softness? I don't think I've ever heard him in any, and I've listened to a lot of his videos. I don't think I've ever heard softness coming from him.
I want you to understand why I'm taking such a heavy pause there. Because whenever we talk about Africa and Ghana and home and ancestors, we go always to the pain and the trauma. We don't go to the softness. On my trip to Ghana in 2023, I engaged in softness and Black luxury and Black kindness and Black joy in a way that people kept asking me if I'm still in Ghana, because they didn't expect me to post anything like this. Where were you? Where are you? I said, I'm in Ghana. I'm at the Movenpick. I'm at the Sandbox. I'm at this restaurant. I'm having a drink here. I am in Kumasi. I am by the pool. There are tons of pictures I could share with you when I was engaged in healing. Thank you, Sandra. Engaging in softness. And I tell you something, Sandra, in my trip in 2024, after I went back in 2024, I'm going to tell you a story, but let me get there. So in 2024, I went back. And I had a different experience. So now remember now, different trips, different experiences. And I noticed in 2024, which was last year, the number of times when I looked through my pictures, how many times I had pictures of altars, libation, gratitude. I have so many pictures. And I didn't even know why I took so many pictures, but I have a whole collections of libation and altars and honoring our ancestors. I went to this place, Ninichinchinio Museum in Volta region, where we had to take off our shoes to enter the space. It's mandatory. You cannot enter the space with your shoes on. I got to experience that. I've heard a lot of people from back in Jamaica, Mutabarukans, people talking about your feet to the ground, feet to the ground. It's powerful when you hear things but it's even more powerful when you experience the meaning in a moment. Not the first time I heard about your feet to the ground. Not the first time we have heard people talk about communicating and understanding what the ground and earth mean. But for me to be on a trip in a big place like this, and a museum, and being asked to enter the gates where the bottom left sculptures are, you had to take off your shoes. And if you refuse to take off your shoes, respectfully, they would ask you not to enter. And they had to make a call to the ancestors for me to explain to you and for you to be there when we took off our shoes. And they called to the ancestors to tell them we were entering the space. I can't explain to you what I felt. I've not had the word as yet. Alyssa, thank you. I have not found the words. I can tell you genuinely, I want to write it, but I don't have the words as yet. So when I go back this year, I'm going to revisit this place to maybe if I could now articulate it in a different mindset, because I felt every single thing. When he finished the calling and he said for us to enter the space, when I enter the space, I cannot explain to you how I felt. And so I'm on my journey. 2024, I spent time in the slave dungeons. I visited both dungeons. I spent time reading and learning. I have tons of pictures. And then I came back and I started working on my paper more, choosing a method, choosing autoethnographic, telling my story, positioning to embrace subjectivity, engage in critical self-reflexivity, speak rather than being spoken for, interrogate my power, and resist oppression. I want you to understand the intentionality behind the work.
So basically, it's about ethnographic methodology is about centering yourself and everything about yourself to apply to what you're doing. To me, this sounds like an incredibly self-centered approach to work and to demand that other people adhere to that. And I'm not sure how that plays out in reality, because if everybody has their own unique life experiences, and we do, and we're all applying our self-centered vision of the world and experiences to everything that we do, how is there cohesion when we have to work together? Education is a bureaucratic system. It's a system where many people need to work together to perform a function. And if it's all so completely individualized and it's about liberation and fighting oppression and all this stuff, when are we actually teaching skills to elevate kids? I mean, there needs to be some kind of standards. Maybe this is just my opinion, but it feels like we need to have standards that everyone works towards to reach a goal in any organization. That's kind of how, I guess, when they talk about solidarity, if we're all working together, in other words, you have to have a goal to reach to. And if we're all applying our own individual self-centered lived experience to everything that we do and others must follow, it doesn't make sense. And although this may be great theoretical stuff to write about at university, we're talking about educating children. I mean, that's the ultimate goal for this work that Andrew B. Coleman is talking about. It's about turning education into some liberatory experiment for particular groups, in this case LGBTQ2S community, systemic forces, racism, sexism, heterosexism, classism, and so on and so forth. Where's the time to actually teach grammar and spelling and math that has nothing to do with this liberatory work? Where's the time for that? This stuff replaces actual building of skills, reaching standards. That should be a concern to everybody. And I said earlier, it's a political project, and that politics is rooted in Marxist concepts. A lot of postmodernism in there too, and some other bits and pieces, but mostly it's just Marxist.
And so I'm going to wrap up here so we can take one or two questions. I leave it to you when I say colonial troubles, trimmings, and trappings. In 2025, we are still in Jamaica, prescribing to all of this. This is what we know. This is what we are still passing on to our students. We still see that our Privy Council is still seated, the seat is still in London, where we have to get a visa to go. This kind of foolishness needs to stop. I feel very impatient with our government, who is trying to do some of this work of decolonization from our chokehold, but it's moving very slow. But in the meantime, I want to encourage all of us that refusal and resistance, and refusal as resistance. That picture came to me this morning after I finished my presentation a couple, maybe 2 weeks ago. This morning I was thinking, and this came to me. This was February 2020. The University of Toronto. I was invited to be on a panel. And I want you to take a look at the question that I was asked. What has been the relationship between your identities and your journey within post-secondary environments, navigating space of leadership, employment, and learning environment? This is February 2020. I want you to be very, very, very intentional about the dates. I was on a panel. I got up. That's how I got standing up. You wonder how are you standing up, Dr. Campbell, on a sitting panel? I stood up to say to this panel that for me, my personal journey, February the 6th, 2020, I said, my personal journey is the ways in which I am stepping away from the colonial ruler that I measure myself against.
Let's be clear here. This man, and again, he has a YouTube channel, and you could go verify what I'm about to say because that's where I got this information. He immigrated to Canada from Jamaica to work and to I believe it was to go to university and then become a professor and so on and so forth. Right? So he's a teacher in Jamaica, and he came to Canada as an immigrant to study and to work here. And from the very beginning, he said in some of his videos that he's done really, really well for himself, and he's been engaging in this anti-racist stuff from the beginning. So he's benefited from this refusal and resistance that he keeps talking about. So he's benefiting materially from putting down the country that has accepted him, calling it racist, white supremacist, all this stuff that needs to be dismantled, disrupted and dismantled and all this stuff. And he has, because this country embraces basically woke ideology, he has done really, really well. And he's very confident, and he's an engaging speaker, regardless of what you think about him. He's very engaging. He has a sort of preacher style about him. And so he's extremely popular. He's been extremely successful. He's very influential in the education industry, if you want to call it that, in Ontario, possibly Canada. I'm not sure about the country. But he's done really, really well for himself by basically trying to tear down the system within the country that has accepted him. And we're giving him a lot of money and praise for it. I find that horrendous, because if I was to go to Ghana, the country that he loves, and why not? He enjoys going there. He likes the culture and all that stuff. But imagine going to Ghana and then using the privileges that I have obtained from being in that country, not to assimilate to that country, but to try to dismantle and disrupt the system and to impose my lived experience, my vision of what it should be, to refuse and resist Ghanaian culture, to impose my own. How would that go down? So again, I will just reiterate, it's not just a guy who's being an activist and being in community circles talking about the rights for groups of people and so on and so forth. He's very influential in education in Ontario and very successful. He's won multiple awards. I believe he's I believe I mentioned in the beginning, he's the director of the Black Excellence Center at OISE. And he's doing this. I find that very, very insulting personally. And I don't know how you feel about it. Maybe tell me in the comments.
2020. I got up, I made a physical, I'll do that, Barbara. I make a physical gesture of standing against the wall, leaning against the wall, and measuring myself against colonial practices, trimmings and trappings. And I said to them, I kept my hand there and I said, I am learning how not to do this. Because we always talk about our blackness in relationship to whiteness. Who are you, as clearly Rodriguez asks, without colonialism? And so the question that day, I repeat for you, Barbara, what has been the relationship between your identity and your journey within post-secondary environments, navigating the spaces? And so as I continue to navigate the space, I am navigating the spaces. I'm going to be talking about my struggle. Here is where I'm going to bring in my identity as.
What is his struggle? To be ultra successful, to make a lot of money, keeps talking about how much money he has, how great his life is. What struggle? What struggle is he talking about? He is a grifter. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. This guy is a grifter. He's using this ideology to advance himself. He tells you he's centering his experience. He's using the language. He's imposing it. He's going up the career ladder by putting everyone else down, centering not just the community voice, it's his voice specifically. And he's talking to you about his struggle. What?
A Black gay man, because that has been one of the main parts of my struggle. We go into very Black spaces and everything is cool until sexuality comes up. Do I belong? Yes, I do. And so I'm navigating identity. What does it mean? I use food because I'm a foodie, and I use food as my identity for today. I guarantee maybe a month, 2 months from now, I may change the picture. But for now, food has taught me so much. Seasoning. And I'm going to surprise some of you. The ways in which I have seen many of us Black folks refuse food in Ghana is also part of what I'm learning about identity.
Maybe they just don't like it.
That's a heavy one, and we'll get back to that another time. Because I've seen Black people in Ghana refuse food, and the explanation would make you sad.
So here we are again. If a person is Black, but they're not doing what I want, what I feel that Black people should be doing in this ideology, I'm going to call them out as not being Black enough.
Who are you without colonialism? Many of us, we have no idea. Professor Jo Kiwan, who I highly respect and admire in this university, I pulled her aside in 2022 and I said to her, I am writing about who I am without colonialism. And she looked at me and she said, many of us don't know because we don't even think about who we are. The wisdom from a powerhouse like Joki. And so I'm learning. It's a journey. Belonging, I use my mom because I found belonging there. And power, I use a picture of myself in the ways I have navigated and taken up space.
I love that picture of power because to me that says it all. He feels powerful. I swear to God, this man has so many malignant narcissistic traits, and that just says it all. The picture for power is himself.
A part of my problem right now is the ways in which people are maybe frustrated with the space that I take up. And I smile every time I see it because it is absolutely what we are trying to teach people. that we are deserving of spaces, but the space I take up, I can see as being problematic to many people. So I leave it to you this final slide. I'm going to stop right here. What are the implications for you as educators, for me, for our pedagogy, for our practice? And as we do this work, Eunice, I see you. I see you, Eunice. Enough love and respect. Implications for us as educators. That's what I know. And many places you work in, you can take education out and put nursing and social work, accounts, whatever. Implications is that we have to continue disrupting deficit thinking about Black children.
So that's interesting. He points out that you could replace education for any other industry, and that's true. It could be nursing, medicine, law, you name it, doesn't matter. Any other industry is going through this right now in Canada, and we need to talk. So I talk about education, but I was at the Canada Strong and Free Network conference, and I met other people from other industries attacking these generally woke infiltrators in many of our industries who are causing so much havoc and destruction, what they call disrupting and dismantling, which is just destruction of systems, which is not actually helpful for the very people they say they wish to help. So he's right. You could replace, implication for educators with implications for social workers, implications for lawyers, implications for just about anybody, corporate HR, coordinators. This applies because they're trying to completely transform society for this political ideology rooted in Marxism.
Holding high expectations for Black children, talking about what is culturally relevant, responsive, and sustaining pedagogy. What does that look like in our classrooms? I am very intentional when I speak to non-Black teachers because I want them to understand what it means to hold expectations. Student identity, how do we create affirming spaces, even at the university here? You see the work we are doing with BFEP from the Master of Teaching program. What does that look like to create affirming spaces?
High expectations is a really interesting one because to most people listening, that's going to mean there's a standard or bar, and you have high expectations that the children will not only reach the standard, but excel above that particular standard. But that's not what they mean when we're talking about CRRP. They're talking about that bar, that standard, is in itself the problem. Let's get rid of that, and each individual child, based on factors like their identity, their race, their sexuality, their socioeconomic status, whatever it is, these intersectionalities, depending on their intersectionalities, they will have a different standard for that child. So the high expectation is the high expectation that they can self-identify their standard and work towards it, which is a completely different thing. And simply using the term high expectation does not explain that. And we all want high expectations for our children in education, but their meaning is different. It is no longer having an expectation, everybody has the same expectation and you must reach or surpass it. No, it just means get rid of the standard and then replace that for each individual child can sort of self-identify a standard that apparently works for them. That, in other words, is adultifying children. We use the term parentifying in family dynamics, but it's adultifying in the schooling environment. Young children need guidance. They need adults to guide them in the knowledge they need to know or things like that in behavior. But they're trying to remove that. They're trying to make it what they call child-centered. That is not good for a child's development. And we're seeing a lot of that in schools. There's so many posters for mental health, the real approach on mental health. And the more they do this stuff, the more mental health supports they're going to need because it is not good for the development of the child.
What is abolitionist pedagogy, liberatory pedagogy? What do you mean by pedagogy of love and belonging? And how do we ensure that we connect with community? If you see my work as the director of the Center for Black Studies at OISE, I am very big on community. It's not inward facing the work alone, but the work is also outward facing. I'm going to stop here. I know we have a few minutes and I want to make sure I answer a couple of the questions that I see. So let me jump right into that. If you have a question, throw it in the box. If you have a comment, throw it in the box as well, because it's important for me to learn from you. I've been seeing comments. Thank you. I think it was one person that made a comment earlier. And so if you have a comment, you can throw it in the question box as well. There's a question here from someone anonymous. Once Jamaica achieved independence, why is there still in 2025 perpetuation of this white supremacy messaging to children in our country that is led by racialized communities? It don't know who we are.
So again, a question about how us as people of color, why are we accepting other people of color not falling in line with our ideology? That's the question.
Without that. And we, as I said to you before earlier, we are, many of us, if we look into what we are doing, we are responsible for strengthening and sustaining colonial practices. We defend it. We defend it. We like whiteness. Let's be very frank about that. We have learned how to love and prefer whiteness. We could debate this for the next 2 hours. When I travel to Jamaica, I can expect in any restaurant I go to in a tourist area to get less. We have been educated, we have been nurtured as superior. We have been taught how whiteness is deserving. That is why my section of my book, or my chapter about softness, is going to be so major. Because we don't put blackness and softness in the same sentence. We don't put blackness and luxury in the same sentence. We don't put blackness and deserving in the same sentence. We have to learn how to decolonize ourselves, how to serve each other, how to prefer each other, how to respect and strong right now. And I'm going to tell you this. As a Black professor at University of Toronto, I have had students who were disappointed when they got to their class and they realized they have paid so much money to be at the top university in Canada, and oh, damn it, the professor is Black. Immediately, something has been lost. Something is less. And I dare say that questioning comes from Black students as well. Because we...
Can you imagine? This guy used to be an elementary teacher. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine having this guy as your teacher?
See whiteness as superior. So we have a lot of self-work to do. Now you understand the term self. We have a lot of self-work to do. I hope you notice nowhere in this presentation I called on any person who is colonial or white to work with me on myself. This is self-work that I am doing on myself. I want you to take note of that. So I'm not here to blame. I am not here to accuse. I am not here to highlight and to center whiteness. I'm wondering how is your decolonial journey is progressing in relation to navigating colonial Christian teachings. Honestly, I'm very...
I just want to point out that there's a lot of this Marxist ideology, even in Christianity. If you're curious about that, you can look up liberation theology. Marxists have aligned themselves for quite a long time, or at least Christians who like Marxist ideology have sort of created this liberation theology, and a whole bunch of other things have come out of that. So if you're curious, you could go look that up.
I'm busy, but I would love a good conversation, maybe over lunch with you with that. I'm working on it. I'm working on it. I am working on it. And I'm going to be very frank with you. It's one of the harder part of the work? Thank you for that question. It's one of the harder part of the process because I grew up in church. And if you know anything about religion and Africa right now, and the Caribbean and America and Black America, the church has been that space where we gather. The building itself, the physical building, is where Black people kept community in most spaces. For many of us as Black folks, that's the community we know. And we have been taught and presented with that. So unlearning that is quite a bit of journey. But I will tell you quick, because I know I have another minute, to share with you what helped my journey so far. In 2022, there's a picture that I don't think it's on this slide. In my first trip to the slave dungeons in Ghana, and they call it Castle. We were doing all the dungeons, and it's something to experience, and everybody would have different reaction. I was quiet. I didn't speak for the entire journey. And when we came out of all the dungeons, we took a step up now to where slave masters and slave capturers would stay, and the soldiers. And they took us to the library. And then they took us from the library to the church. And on the way to the church, we had to pass this space in the ground. And they stopped us to make a note that on the entrance to the church, it's where the ventilation of the dungeon is. And that for me impacted me and still has impacted me. That on the way to church, on the way to the only ventilation for the dungeon. Fluids that they stayed in for days. I want to be very clear on that. There. And they would cover their nose to step over that to go into the house of the Lord, quote unquote. And so for me, I say this publicly, and I say this in a powerful way. For me, I am working to unpack that as we speak. I've unpacked a lot of it already, but I'm still working to unpack that. And it's funny because I'm going to take us into the present. When I see what's going on in many of our spaces, especially in America, and listen to how these oppressors, racists, white supremacists, homophobic, transphobic, horrible people speak about that church, as we know religion, is one of the most terrible places. And so I'm wrestling with that. Thank you for that question again. I'm wrestling with that, but the wrestling is not within as much as it is without. And I'm thankful for that. So we're going to wrap up there. We're going to be respectful of time. Thank you so much for having me. I am honored to be in this space. I do a lot of speaking and...
Okay, so the rest of it is just thanks. So that's it. That's the talk that came out a few weeks ago. That's a lot to take in. I didn't want to comment too much. I just really wanted to show you what an activist, a very successful activist educator sounds like. I've heard very, very similar things recently with some union events that eventually I might talk about. But the concern here is you need to understand that it's not, I know it's presented like they're trying to help these marginal individuals or children, but the reason I want to share this video is because he's making that clear that really it's about the educator or the leader, whoever it is, in this case, Dr. ABC. It's about them. It's about their politics. It's about their views. It's about what they want to impose. They're just using an ideology to make that happen. And they're shaming other people into it. Even towards the end when he's talking about Christians. Listen, I'm not a Christian. But even the way that he's talking about them is that if the religion that they're practicing isn't my version, they are, and he lists off a whole bunch of names and calls them horrible people. So if you, and he does the same with Black people in this talk, where people of color or Black people who are not in line with his ideas of what should be his political vision for the world, then they need to be re-educated or rejected. And so that's a problem when we're talking about transforming the entire education system in a vision that looks like this. And it's not just Dr. ABC. There's a whole bunch of other people. I just literally yesterday put out a video about that looks at the Dreams Delayed. It's an anti-Black racism action plan from the Ontario Human Rights Commission, which is just how to make or how to transform 190 recommendations on how to transform education into the vision of critical race theory from top to bottom. So this is what's happening to education. It is impacting basic skills. So it's not alongside, it's in replacement of learning basic skills, reading, writing, math, whatever. And it is harming the very children they say that they're trying to help, because narcissistic individuals are bullying other people into doing what they want. And we are allowing it through policy and regulation and funding. So that's it for today. It was a bit of a longer video, but go check out Dr. ABC's YouTube channel. I'm Melanie Bennett. This was the Canadian Culture Wars Report, and I'll see you next time. Thank you so much for making it to the end. As you may or may not know, I've been working on this for quite some time, pretty much on my own dime. But now we're facing some costs. We have been putting in so many FOIs and putting in so much effort to get you the information from the inside. Now, unfortunately, FOIs, they fight it. The government does not like revealing information. And that's why I've teamed up with the Emberlight Project, which is a small nonprofit whose main goal is to bring accountability and transparency to government systems. So if you can donate some money, $5, $10, $50, hell, $500 if you can, I've set up a Give, Send, Go. Please consider donating. That would really help bring a lot of this information forward a lot quicker. Thanks for watching.